Getting the right volunteer in the right place is a long journey for some churches. Today, we're talking about taking a shortcut on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking about divine design and trying to get all of your volunteers in your church in the right seat on the bus. And this is, I think, a really important topic, something that I talk about a lot when I work with churches on leadership pipeline design. Is really developing and buying into this Ephesians 4 mindset that every person is called to ministry. Everybody has a role to play. And when our churches are not doing that, we're kind of missing out on the full potential of our church and the full potential of our people. And so all around, it's a win if you can get your church folks activated and serving in ministry. So there are some keys to doing that, some ways that you can, as you said in the teaser, take some shortcuts. So kind of explain this idea of divine design for that term might be new to some of our listeners. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So basically, it's discovering really how has God wired an individual. We know from Scripture that gifts are given by the Spirit to believers. And we know that we're created in the image of God. We know we're also created with unique talents and abilities, with a unique personality. And when you begin to put all these components together, that's what we call divine design. It's kind of, how did God make me? Who was I made to be? And what role do I play in the kingdom and in my church? So when we start to break these things down into just a few categories, and then develop some tools around discovering these things, then we can, in a relatively short period of time, sort of create a little picture of who a person might be. And then that's only half the equation. The other half then is, okay, where does this unique individual fit? But knowing who you're dealing with, it makes it a lot easier then to figure out where the best place might be. And probably a few options to try out.
For sure. There's a book that Aubrey Malphurs wrote quite a while back at this point, but it's called Maximizing Your Effectiveness. This is in its second edition, I believe, that you can grab a copy from the old Amazon. And one of the things that as he introduces the concept of divine design that Aubrey says, he points to as sort of a biblical basis for this is a verse you may be familiar with in Jeremiah 1, verse 4 and 5, where he says, "The word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." This idea that your divine design is just that. It's a design. It's not happenstance. It's not accidental. It's not incidental. And it's God's intention and design for you, both the things that you're born with, but also the experiences that you will have that will shape your direction. Those are also divinely designed. And I think that he makes a good point in the book that it's not nature or nurture, it's both, but not in a happenstance way, but in a really divinely guided and sovereign way that God uses both the innate things and the experiential things to drive us in a particular direction that he set beforehand for us to accomplish, which is more of an Ephesians 1 or 2 concept. So all that being said, there are some key components to understanding your divine design, and we want to just briefly touch on each of these. This is going to be a concept that some of you are more familiar with, but some of you, this might be brand new. And so kind of set that up for us, AJ. What are the 5 key elements of divine design? And then we can go into more detail on each one.
Yeah, well, really, this idea of divine design, it's been stated in a variety of ways. One of the ways that has become more well known throughout the church since the early 2000s came from Rick Warren when he published Purpose Driven Life, and he put together this acronym of SHAPE, SHAPE. And that really sort of captures what Aubrey talks about in maximizing your effectiveness, of these kind of general spheres in which we can put together, find where they overlap, and then build a picture of the people. So so we're going to talk about spiritual gifts. We're going to talk about your heart, or maybe understood as a passion that you have, your abilities or natural talents that you have, personality, and then finally experience. So we're going to take those 5 things one at a time.
Okay, that sounds good. I think, yeah, I like that shape spells a word. We often joke that Aubrey's headings of spiritual gifts, passion, talents, temperament, or abilities, no, natural gifts.
Yeah,
natural gifts, temperament, and experiences. In that order doesn't spell a word, or you could rearrange them so it spells spent. But I think that some people might see spent as being burned out, and like, I'm feeling spent. I need to sit on the porch and drink a lemonade.
I think of it as poured out for the church.
Oh yeah, like a drink offering. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas
we'll go with shape. Same
yeah,
concept.
Same concept.
Maybe
It's really good. And there's a lot of resources out there beyond just what Saddleback has put together to help you. And speaking of, there's like all Aubrey's books, there's a very hefty appendix in this book with a lot of assessments and things that you can use. So I would encourage you to check out the Maximizing Your Effectiveness book and take a look at the assessments that are in there that correspond to these 5 things. Okay.
I think
let's dive in.
It's a sleeper book. It should have gotten more attention. Okay, yeah. Our first one is spiritual gifts. So just jumping right in there, there's a biblical basis for this understanding that every believer is gifted. There's, of course, different points of view on that, depending on your theological, denominational background, and what gifts you even might believe still exist today. We're not here to debate that. But there's lots of spiritual gifts assessments available as well, free online ones, paper produced ones, and they cover, a different array of gifts with different terminology. So lots of options out there. We're not pointing to any one in particular, but in any case, there's quite a bit of crossover on maybe some of the more widely accepted biblical gifts out there. But this is something that I think a lot of church leaders or pastors might kind of brush aside, thinking, well, maybe everybody kind of gets that, or just maybe not giving enough credence to it. But I think on the church side, coming from a lay leader background myself, to it wasn't self-evident what my spiritual gifts were. It only started to make sense after kind of doing an exploration process like that, and getting some terms and some definitions where it kind of made sense. It was more of making sense of what I felt, not necessarily having terminology or words to express it. So it's more of an affirmation of what I knew. I'm just speaking personally. And I think this happens for a lot of people. A spiritual gifts assessment is more sometimes of an affirmation of where you might already think you are, but maybe you can't explain it. So I think there's tremendous value in it. It's inexpensive. It's relatively quick. And I think it can open your eyes to the possibilities of areas of serving in the church in which maybe before you didn't really have the confidence, maybe even to explore.
Sure. Yeah, I think a couple things to keep in mind about spiritual gifts. And I know we touched on this briefly, actually, back in episode 132, and talking about writing volunteer job descriptions. We talked about attaching some spiritual gifts alignment to the job descriptions. This is maybe a good companion episode to that. If you didn't listen to episode 132, that's another kind of practical use of this divine design stuff. But I really believe we need to redeem this word charismata in the Greek, which just means grace gift. This idea that in addition to what you're born with at your spiritual birth, at your second birth, you're given a special grace gift. And the intention of that gift, again, if we kind of follow the logic of the Apostle Paul, is it's a gift that's given to bless the church, to be a part of the family of God. It's about it's an internal thing rather than an external thing primarily. Although you may have the gift of evangelism, so on, but you're given a gift to serve the body, to build up the body, so that we all come together and are fully mature. And so, understanding that, I think, is really important. And so, don't let any weird theology around spiritual gifts that you've heard in the past scare you away from the concept, because you're going to miss out on something really beautiful. So keep that in mind. I think is really, really important.
Yeah. I think that, there's also times in which people might feel they might be serving in an area and they feel maybe it's even less important or something. They might almost kind of feel down about where they serve. It's not maybe a flashy role or anything like that. And I think sometimes the spiritual gifts, understanding, doing an inventory like that and sort of affirming that in you, I would hope that it would build you up, to like, this is important, and this is God given. And there is nothing unimportant in the kingdom, when God has ordained it and blessed it.
That's a really good point. It reminded me of the second thing I wanted to say on this, which is sometimes people get a little hung up on these assessments and themselves, and they're not authoritative. A spiritual gifts assessment is not authoritative on your life, in any way. It's just a signpost. Like, I liked how you talked about it might be affirming something you already know is in there, but it can give direction to people who aren't sure. And again, it's not authoritative, so it doesn't mean that just because this assessment said it makes it true. There might be more information or context or discernment that needs to happen. But so don't view it that way as an authoritative thing in your life, but it can certainly be a helpful tool to help you better understand yourself and how God has wired you in your divine design.
Yeah. One more thing that just came to mind on this, and I know we need to kind of speed up a little bit for the next ones, but speaking of affirmation, you always want to make sure you can find some affirmation outside of a spiritual gift assessment as well. Sure. Check with people that you trust, that you believe have wisdom. Like, do you think here's what I got? Do you see that in me? And that's a really important part of divine design as well. And that's not kind of one of these 5 things, but there is another component, and Aubrey talks about it in the book, is the consultation side of divine design development. So you can go through lots of tools, but then you want to consult with people of wisdom to kind of verify things. And some people push back on spiritual gifts assessments because they're like, you can figure out what they're going for. You can manipulate that. Well, sure you can. Manipulative people can do whatever they want. Right. But, if somebody's going into something with a heart of discovery and understanding, then, we're okay. All right. Long time on that one. Let's go to number 2. In the shape, this is the H, stands for the word heart. Aubrey uses more of the word passion, but this is kind of that almost unquantifiable desire towards something. It's just what has captured your attention, and this thing that you're willing to pour time and energy and maybe money into, so that you just get to be a part of it. And so it's really hard to have necessarily a tool for that. That's going to more so come from within, and that's more evident with some people than it is with others, unfortunately. And those of us that are like, I'm not really sure what my heart or my passion really is, when we look at somebody else that's just on fire for something, and you're like, yeah, I kind of wish I was like that believer. But sometimes, and we'll get to our 5th one, is experiences. Sometimes experiences help unlock passion, kind of retroactively. But anyway, something that you're just really drawn to. That it could be, as long as it's blessing others, a blessing to the church, then I think it's kind of on the table.
I think that the passion component, we'll often say in our training that it's the thing that energizes your gifts. Yeah. So it's the 2 people can have maybe a spiritual gift of teaching and maybe some natural skill and talent, like we're going to talk about in a minute, about around communication or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you maybe have a different passion, and it'll express itself differently. So maybe you love maybe you love teaching Bible studies, and so you want to be a small group leader or a Bible study leader in your church. Or maybe you love students or kids or anything like that, and so you're going to take that same gifting, and then you're going to direct it towards children's ministry, student ministry, based on that passion. So your passion can direct and energize your gifts, and so that's the best way to think about it. Is it's the thing that maybe kind of pushes you in a particular direction. So if I've got all other things being equal, if I get 5 different volunteer opportunities placed in front of me, my passion might be the thing that influences me in a particular direction.
Yeah.
Given the same gifts, talents, and temperament, and all of those other things kind of being accounted for, passion maybe makes the decision on where you want to serve.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Our next one is our third point here is the word abilities. The A is abilities. Also could be natural abilities or talents, natural talents. So this idea of, just that nobody really had to train you much in it. It just sort of happened. This is most evident, with people, certainly with like musical talents and abilities, things like that come out. You're just born with a beautiful voice. It wasn't really anything that you did, though. Of course, there's practice and training that happens with that, but things that you're just capable of doing, maybe, more effectively or to a greater degree than somebody else that doesn't have the same talents. God uses that in the kingdom as well. And there's so many things that maybe you're even using outside of the church that can be used inside the church. So that's where we know,
or that you were born with before you became a believer. Whereas spiritual gifts are really seen as these are spiritual gifts that you're given at your new birth, your second birth. Whereas these other things you may have been born with and, fueled your life in some ways before you became a believer. You mentioned music's one, but there's other things too. Like, for example, AJ, you're much more technically and mechanically inclined than I am. If something breaks at my house, I go, well, let's find someone who can fix that. There's zero shot for the most part that it's going to be me. Not just because I don't want to do it, although there's that, but also because I get very frustrated by it. I mean, you put a piece of IKEA furniture in front of me to put together, and I'm in for a bad night. I don't love it. So, and I know you're laughing at me a little bit, and that's fine. It's well deserved. But some people have a more of an inclination towards being able to work with their hands and put things together and understand these things than other people. So
for sure. Yeah. And that's, the church needs that. Teachers, communicators. I mean, there's
creative types.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are all of these things have a place in the kingdom. There's probably a longer list of natural abilities and talents that can be used than those that cannot be used. So
I'm trying to think of things that could not be used.
What you might be good at that we would never really need in the church. I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
If you're watching on YouTube, put in the comments, give us a list of things that the church doesn't need you for.
Underwater basket weaving? I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe so. Moses was in a basket in the water.
That's good to say. Yeah. Oh, that's good. All right.
Number 4 is personality. So, Scott, I'm going to let you talk mostly about personality because
are you going to give me a chance to redeem myself? Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah. This is definitely, I think you have a natural ability to perceive, understand, and talk about personality. So I do not. So
all right,
there you go.
Okay. If you want to see me totally screw this up, go back to episode 132, in which I
Are you sure you get that number right? 132?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm lying to you. I'm so sorry. No. I'm looking at line 132 on this chart, and it's not that. It's episode 125.
Okay.
125. So psych to all of you who heard it earlier.
You want me to-
125 episode.
Well, you
Came
mentioned
on-
an episode earlier also, and I think you were
It's the same one. It's
same one?
episode
Oh, okay.
125.
All
Yeah.
right, 125.
Yeah. How to write volunteer
job
job descriptions. Yeah. We talk about spiritual gifts and we talk about temperament. And so the DISC is our preferred method in maximizing your effectiveness. Aubrey talks about DISC. He also talks about the Myers-Briggs. I say keep it simple, my preference. So I like the DISC. And so again, I'm going to keep this very brief. DISC is 4 primary types: D's, I's, S's, and C's. And you can think of it very simply as 2 axes, a horizontal axis of task orientation to people orientation. Some people are more task oriented, some people are more people oriented. And then you can think of a vertical axis, that goes sort of an extroversion to introversion scale. And so this creates 4 key boxes for you. So it can be task oriented and extroverted. That's the D or dominant type, which is, again, people who are your classic leader type. They want to take the hill. They're really about getting the next thing done, conquering, getting things done, but they like to be in front of people, motivate people, move people, and so on. Then you can be extroverted and people oriented. These are people who this is I, which stands for influence. They're more charismatic in personality. People like them. They're people, but they're like networkers. They're the people who are like, I know a guy. That's what the I could stand for. I know. Oh yeah, I know a guy. That's the kind of people that they are. They like to know lots of folks, but they're not very good at getting things done. So they have a lot of ideas. The I could stand for I'm an idea guy. That's what they are. They're not very good at following through on tasks, but good on stage, good communicators, and so on, and good at networking and that sort of thing. Then you can be task oriented. People oriented and introverted. That's the S type, which stands for steady. So these are folks who the S could also stand for shepherding. People do like to be counseling. This is the traditional pastoral type, counseling, hospital visits, this kind of thing. They're really good at that. Those one-on-one or smaller interactions. They'll have deep relationships with people. People go, oh, this person is so nice, and so on. The difficulty with S's is that they tend to be more conflict averse. So sometimes a true firm S, you will never know really where they stand on an issue. You can say, well, what's their opinion on this? Well, who's the last person they talked to? That's probably their opinion. So the challenge with S's in leadership positions is that they very often will not take a position because they're very concerned about hurting people's feelings. So S-type pastors, for example, struggle, but they're really good at some of the pastoral type role things: shepherding, weddings, funerals, hospital visits, so on. And then finally, C, there's these people who are task-oriented and introverted. These are your folks who they like spreadsheets, timelines, budgets, getting things done. Very, very good at just executing tasks. Usually actually really good managers of people because they're willing to say hard things. They see people as tools for accomplishing tasks and projects. They're good project managers, good at following up on things and so on. The downside with C's is they tend to not be particularly pleasant or enjoyable people to be around. They'd much rather be alone with a spreadsheet and a task list. The C stands for conscientious, by the way, and that's what they are. They're going to follow the rules. They're going to follow the timeline. They're going to follow the budget. So they're very useful folks to have on your team. And if you don't have those folks on your team, probably not a lot's getting done, because a D likes to get things done, but they're not going to do it themselves. They're just going to find people who will do it. Whereas the C is happy to just knock things out. It's very rewarding to see a to-do list kind of just get knocked out for them. So, all right, I got through D, I, S, and C, and I did it without accidentally saying horizontal twice, which if you're wondering, what did I do on episode 125? I said horizontal twice for some reason.
And I couldn't let it go.
You couldn't let it go. And nor should you. Nor should you. Yeah.
All right. Our fifth point today is in our SHAPE acronym is the word experiences. And this is a kind of a big one for me. I love considering our experiences in how God has put us together and what he has for us to do.
Tell me about that, because that's usually the one that I kind of just blow past. So what is it about? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you,
it's not important. I guess I'm so interested. What about
I think because I mean, I feel like I've just done a lot of interesting and different things throughout my life, and they've all just added value. But one of the most significant impacts on me in ministry was going on my first mission trip, which happened only just a short number of years ago, when my pastor put a lot of trust in me and took me on a trip, to do a really challenging and hard task, a teaching task. And it was life-changing. And it's affected me to this day. And it contributed to me speaking to you today by whatever means you're hearing my voice. But it was that experience that really helped unlock a lot of the other things. It just made sense of other things. So I love the idea of, in a process, in a system for getting people connected into your church, a way of them being able to get in and try something out. I mean, introduce them to leaders of ministry areas, have them come in and join, the team as they're preparing for something, whatever it is. Get out there and kick the tires of a ministry and try it out, because you just never know. Something that they never thought they might be interested in. You encourage them to do it if it looks like maybe that's something that might be a good deal, and just try it out. But also encouraging people to just look back over the span of your life at the things that you've done. What was the results of those things? How did you feel when you're doing that? I just think that's just really important in helping people to find something, unlock something in somebody that they just wouldn't have maybe seen on their own.
That's a really good point. I don't know that I've ever thought too much about it. It's one of those things that you take for granted, your experiences, and maybe don't think much about the role that they've played in why you're doing what you're doing, or why you ought to do the thing that you want to do or God is calling you to do. So that's a good point. Yeah, it's really good. And maybe one that's it's certainly more subjective and would take more reflection than sitting down. There's something very appealing to me about just sitting down with a tool and just being able to like answer questions and with an inventory, and just going to spit out a result for me, versus the experience. You can't do that. You've really got to sit and think and meditate and maybe even pray a bit and see what the Lord resurfaces in your memory of your experiences and how that might shape.
Yeah. Or just step out to
ministry.
Step out and do something maybe you're a little uncomfortable with, because that could really point you in a new direction. Yeah,
really good. Okay, well, just to kind of put a bow on this, we want you to help folks find their fit. And if you're going to help them find their fit, they have to know their shape and understand their divine design. And so a couple of things that you can do. One, integrate this shape content, the divine design stuff into, we really recommend a new member class doing that. So people who are new to your church, get them connected to understanding their divine design as early as possible, because no one's more excited about serving at your church than someone who's new. Someone who's had time to get used to sitting there, it's hard to get that person activated. But for those folks who maybe have been sitting around a while, force everyone to go through this process by integrating it into your Sunday school class or some sort of curriculum of small groups, doing a sermon series on it, so on. So you encourage people to think about this. But before you go through all of that process, it's important that you do the hard work of sorting all of your opportunities by at least spiritual gifts and temperament. And that's what we talked about in episode 125. So that really is a good companion. And I misspoke at the beginning of the episode. So 125, If you listen to that as a companion to this, and on that episode still, AJ, I think there's a form to download a job description template so people can go back and take a look at that and download that template. If you'll pair what we were talking about in this episode with what we talked about in that episode, you can really get a lot out of your congregation that is maybe untapped potential right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Great stuff. Thanks for being with us. We're always glad that you're here. And our audience is continuously growing. So thank you for that as well, because you're out there sharing it and passing on content. And so we're super grateful for that. Love having you with us every week. This has been episode 130 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. And today's show notes are on malfirsgroup.com/130. And Scott and I will be back with you again next week to talk a little bit about Old St. Patty.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Listen, hey,
stay tuned.
Those of you who are like, didn't you guys do an episode on that? Yeah, we did.
A year ago.
And listen, I'm a fan. That's all I'm going to say.
That's okay.
I'm a fan, and he deserves to get talked about once a year for more than green beer and leprechauns and all of that.
Even though he invented all of those things that we're going to talk about,
things for sure happen.
More significant things. Thanks for being with us. See you next week.